And looking at the companies that reported after the close yesterday, that is Apple, Alphabet, and Microsoft, they reported a combined $57 billion in profit last quarter. That translates into $620 million a day. Apple trading a little bit lower this morning, Google up by 3.5%, and Microsoft gaining 1.25%. So we want to break this down a little bit more and turn it over to all three of us, Myles Udland and Brian Sozzi, of course, here as well this morning, because as we just looked at, even though all of the companies beat estimates, came out with big numbers, they're trading differently because, of course, as always, there's some nuance. Let's take Apple first, because the stock is trading a little bit lower. Even though it had its biggest second quarter profit in its history, it sounds like they're a little bit cautious on this current quarter, right?
Yeah, the revenue guidance for them was very strong, 36% in the quarter. But Tim Cook and the team last night on the earnings conference call signaled that growth will be more along the lines of around low double digits for that September quarter here. The stock was down initially after market, powering back a little bit here. Good note this morning from Goldman Sachs Apple analyst or tech analyst Rod Hall, reiterating a $140 price target on Apple, saying, quote, "We find no fault in these numbers and continue to see Apple's execution here as exceptional given the size and scope of the company." And Hall is right. I mean, this is an impressive quarter, many records across the board here. But again, that guidance for the September quarter are concern on the street. Also a concern on the street, what they're saying about China.
Yeah, I think the other thing, with Apple here is you continue to see the transformation of the business as the services revenue continues to climb in proportion with the rest of what we're seeing, across the company. And I think overall for Apple, it's a record second quarter, but this has always been their sleepier time of year. It's always been we're waiting for the next big thing. And it's funny to see, these figures up here. We talked with an analyst yesterday, Chris Sankar over at Cowen, about what we'd see on the Mac line, on the iPad line, those both beating expectations, continuing to be sort of surprise drivers for the company. But, you look at one part of the business, and that's the wearables, where revenues were down about $2 billion compared to the last quarter because you don't have, you don't have the impact of any kind of holiday season in there. And so you start to think about what is that business going to look like as we get into, Q4. And ultimately, really, it'll be the Q1 of 22. Which I guess, what is this, Apple's fiscal third quarter? So it'll be their fiscal second quarter is really the one. I can't keep it straight.
Yeah, I've just started to say current quarter and last quarter.
We need to outlaw that. Companies who run irregular fiscal
calendar
quarter.
Year or bust.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention is about chips, because we've been paying so much attention to chips. The company actually said that chip shortage cost them less than it had anticipated in the quarter. Luca Maestri had said sales could be hurt by as much as $4 billion because of chips not having enough to go into their products. And they said instead it was just below $3 billion. So they managed that a little bit better. Although Apple is never seen as being the most at-risk company from that issue.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk at length, ad nauseum, I would almost argue, about the chip shortage. But when it comes to a company like an Apple, they just go to a factory or a foundry and they say, we'll take all of them. And so they don't have the problem. That spends a little more money, but is money an object to Apple? Who could say?
Almost $200 billion in cash coming out of the quarter here. Google had about $135 billion, so Apple continues to lead in that regard. Worth noting, too, and we talked about this thread yesterday about how it could be a good back-to-school shopping season as a lot of kids go back to school. We saw that in 3M's results, office supply selling out. Apple talking a good bit on its earnings call last night about the education market, how it's getting more computers, more iPads to the education market. So, again, even from Apple, there has been some concerns about a slowdown in PC demand as people go back out into the wild. But, again, the education market, at least for Apple, maybe even an HP, could be pretty good this season.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes, because if people were going to buy iPads, Macs for their kids, they probably did it last year.
I haven't used my iPad. I got one during the pandemic. I've barely used it.
I got one 2 years ago, and I don't use it either.
Right?
Yeah. I actually bring it to work every day thinking, today on the train I'll use it.
Never use it.
I don't use it.
No use for it.
You got to stop bringing it.
Why? I got an iPhone.
Exactly.
It's pretty much the same thing.
All right, let's talk about Alphabet. And as we sort of talked about, and as was presaged by the Snap numbers showing strong advertising, Google did well, more than doubling its quarterly profit, $18.5 billion, beating estimates. YouTube, that was a standout that our producer noticed that we've also been paying attention to. Revenue there over $7 billion, which is an 83% increase from last year. And if you want to compare it to Netflix, which I suppose you could, $7.34 billion is Netflix, $7 billion now is YouTube.
Well, so the thing with YouTube is that's $7 billion on the YouTube ads. So I guess they have the subscription part of the YouTube TV as well. And we don't exactly know what that revenue is. And so I guess you could maybe impute this revenue is even stronger than it is. But I think, you look at $7 billion for YouTube, $7.3 billion for Netflix in the most recent quarter. I think another interesting comp in here, and obviously the company's a lot smaller, but I went over and looked at Roku's most recent ad, so platform revenue as they call it rather than product revenue. That was $466 million in the most recent quarter. Now Roku will come out with their results in a couple of weeks, but Sozzi really gives you the scope of the scale of YouTube. And I've been kind of thinking this morning, and I don't know, maybe I'll write it for tomorrow, maybe I won't, but it's this idea of these businesses within the business. It's like, okay, we talk about Google, and obviously they have most of it is the ads on search, but inside of there, you just have businesses that are, top 25 would be in the S&P if they were on their own?
Yeah, Google Cloud, you have the Waymo business that are certainly still emerging here too. But really, guys, this is the second straight consecutive quarter where Google, I think, captured the minds of Wall Street, at least in terms of profits. Really big beats here on operating margins across the board. And Jefferies, Brent Thill, friend of the show, making a good point here this morning. The stock only trades about 15 times next year's operating profits. That's a discount to how much they could grow at about a 25% clip. That is also good. And I know we talked a little bit about this in our morning meeting too. Google is saying, or said on its conference call, they're still all in on offices. They're out there buying commercial property, even as we continue to be in the pandemic, continue to see restrictions coming back. In some states, they're buying more office property. Very interesting.
It is. Apple, maybe not so much.
Yeah.
Although they're building still their huge campus, right? It opened, didn't it?
It's done.
It's done.
I mean, it seems like my whole life they've been building it, but it's in one big circle, concentric circles.
Let's turn it finally within the big three to Microsoft here. Record quarterly sales there as well. Revenue up 21%. And, here too, you've got a company where we're seeing the numbers just continue to be very solid. One, it looks like area of weakness, which might be a reason that Microsoft shares are not doing quite as well this morning, although they are trading higher. Video games waning a little bit from where they were during the pandemic.
And where we were just talking about Google with the second straight impressive quarter, Microsoft, really a good quarter overall, but the second straight quarter where they're now starting to feel the effects of large numbers, those large growth comparisons during the pandemic. Perhaps growth is, in fact, slowing down a little bit in the street, isn't liking that. And you called out video games, Julie. Microsoft also guided their operating margin down in fiscal 2022. That was a call out here being mentioned by many on the street. Also, Windows OEM, that declined 3% in constant currency in terms of sales, another red flag. And then finally, commercial bookings, that decelerated sequentially. Again, another concern here on the street.
And I know that these companies sort of operate outside of the real world where you face supply constraints and you have these other problems given their size. But Microsoft, again, on that call, talking about console growth, so the new Xbox constrained by supply. At the Xbox level, a little bit different than maybe the iPhone level, where you still have some of those problems getting enough consoles together. And certainly anyone who's tried to buy, a new Xbox, obviously PS5, I think, has a few more issues on that front. But same idea, right? You go to a GameStop.
You still play games?
I bought an Xbox in the pandemic. I played it for like 3 months, and now the life one moves on. So it's
like
there
your iPad.
collecting dust.
Yeah.
All kinds of things,
Yeah.
We do what we need to get through it.